reshaped or recontoured in order to accept this design. Areas that have to be reshaped in the mouth are marked in red.
God damn.
Then the final part of the practical in 2 weeks, is what, actually in 3 weeks, the 7th, the 14th, the 21st, yeah, in 3 weeks. The final part is the work authorization order. And next week in lecture, we'll show you how to write a work authorization order for the commercial dental laboratory to make the framework for you. Okay, so we would, if this were our patient, refer to our dentograph, so I'll put that to the side. And then we have our cast. And so, now, help. So we know that people don't come with rests built into their mouth. So we're going to have to draw in red our rests. So on your casts that you have, because you probably don't have the design drawn in on yours yet, on the cast that you surveyed, I want you to, at the mesial occlusal of the molar, put red rest that's about the size of an 8 round burr. On the cingulum of the canine, just a gentle crescent over the cingulum, with the ends of it no closer than 1 millimeter away from the free gingival margin. And on the other side, the disto-occlusal of the first premolar, you will have your rest, again, about the size of a number 8 round burr, and the mesio-occlusal of the first molar, a red marking about the size of a number 8 round burr. We'll look at the cast in general, and as we look at it, the occlusal plane looks to be pretty good. There don't seem to be extruded teeth anywhere that are real high, that we would have to do any adjustments. So I don't need to do any reshaping or recontouring for that. The next thing we would be working on would be our guide surfaces. So we'd look for the mesial surface of the molar number 18. Getting closer. No, 18. Okay, so we see that our height of contour line is a couple of millimeters above the gingiva. And so therefore we need to lower the height of contour line there down until the last millimeter right above the gingiva, it's just Yellowstone. We don't want to bring the red all the way down to the gingiva. Stay just a little bit above it. But we do need to draw some red underneath that height of contour line that is high on the mesial surface. Then most of you, I think, as you went around to the lingual, you decided you were going to use like a distolingual, or maybe some of you a mesiolingual undercut. For those that were using a distolingual undercut, we need to mark in red from your height of contour down to the junction of the middle third of the clinical crown. That way then, as my shoulder of my retentive arm comes off of the mesial guide plate and comes back to the body of the clasp, which will transition from superbulge to infrabulge, and then end up in the retentive terminus of it in its O1O undercut at the distal. I don't want any red markings at the distal, but at that mesiolingual where that height of contour line is high, I need to lower that down to the junction of the middle and gingival thirds of the clinical crown. All right, so if I go to my patient's mouth and I adjust that retentive surface, I'm not going to need to do anything particularly to the facial surface because there really were no undercuts. The height of contour was right down at the gingiva, so I don't really need to mark any red on the facial of that. So then when I look at my cast, when my patient comes in, I know that, okay, I'm going to do my guide surface first, then do my retentive surface. I don't have anything to do on the reciprocal surface, and the last thing I'll do is I'll put in a little rest, and that's all I have to do that day. So let's go up to the canine. Okay, for the canine, just above the cingulum, we want to draw a crescent shape, which will be, and as I said, whether it's a finger cingulum or a hooded cingulum, the prep on the tooth will be the same. Right now, I just need red for it. At the distal of that canine, on mine anyway, the height of contour line is right down at the gingiva. So I'm going to have about 2.5, almost 3 millimeters of vertical height, which will be above my height of contour line, coming incisally to have my guide plate. So I don't need to put any markings on the canine. It's already there. As I look at the front of the canine, again, my height of contour line is low at the distal. And so the shoulder of my retentive arm can come off super bulge and then go to its undercut. So I don't need to do any reshaping on the canine. Let's look at the premolar. We did our occlusal rest already. Now I have a low line on the back of my premolar. The height of contour line is right down at the gingiva, so I have a couple of millimeters above that. So again, I don't need to put any red mark. I'm only putting red where I'm going to have to reshape in my patient's mouth. So I really don't have anything to do on that premolar on this particular cast the way it has been surveyed. Finally, we'll look at the molar. We have our mesial occlusal rest, the size of an 8-round burr. As we bring it up, my height of contour was a little high there, so I wanted to lower it. So I put some red. 1/2 to 2/3 the buccolingual cusp tip width. And admittedly, it gets down almost touching the gingiva on this tooth. There's very little surface on there. Would like to stay a millimeter above. Sometimes it's just impossible to do that.
Breaking the rules.
As I look at the facial surface, again, the height of contour is low, so I'll be able to get the shoulder of my retentive arm super bulge, and then the body transitions, and then my retentive terminus end goes below my height of contour. So no problems there. Let's look at the reciprocal side. There's a major problem. On the reciprocal side, my height of contour is real high, particularly at the mesiolingual. So I need to mark in red under there down to the junction of the middle and gingival thirds from mesial to distal on that lingual surface, all in red, because I'm going to have to lower my height of contour from where it began to down to the junction of the middle and gingival thirds of the clinical crown. That way, then, my whole entire reciprocal arm can end up being super bulge above the height of contour. I would not want any part of my reciprocal arm to be in an infrabulge. Okay, so we've marked in red all along there. Okay, then the next thing we do is to draw in blue my overall fringe. So I connect with a minor connector in blue my occlusal rest and my guide plate on the mesial of the molar down to the bottom of where, about 7 millimeters down, where I expect my lingual bar to end. For those of you that wish to do that, you can get a millimeter ruler and measure that area to see that indeed it's about 7 millimeters in. From the free gingival margin to the bottom of my lingual bar.
To the bottom of the lingual bar.
Then usually draw a line down from my next direct retainer and guide plate. On the other side, I'll draw a line down to 7 millimeters below. And on the molar, I'll draw my line down 7 millimeters below. At this point, I'll come back to my molar and I'll draw in my retentive arm arising from my guide plate, coming around the mesiolingual corner and right on top of the red. So now your blue line is going to get kind of reddish blue. We expect to see that. That proves that you're putting the blue on top of the red, which has been reshaping that mesiolingual surface where you're in your patient's mouth, where you're going to reshape it. And then we don't want to see any red back toward the back where our retentive terminus ends in an O1O undercut. We'll have our reciprocal, our retentive arm all along there. On the facial, we will just have our retentive arm right along the junction of the middle and gingival thirds of the clinical crown. Same thing for the canine. From the distal guide plate, we just draw in blue our retentive arm, so the shoulders superbulge, the body transitions, and the tip of the blue retentive arm ends at my O1O undercut.
Undercut.
Premolar on the other side, same thing, off of the distal guide plate. We would draw blue coming to my O1O inch undercut at the mesiofacial. And on my molar, and on the lingual side, I'll draw my reciprocal arm, again at the junction of the middle and gingival thirds of my clinical crown. On the molar, from the guide plate, I draw my retentive arm back to my O1O undercut. And on my reciprocal side, on top of the red, I draw blue. For my reciprocal arm. So now I have drawn in my direct retainer on the molar, on the canine, and on my premolar and on my molar. Next, I would draw in my physical retainer by connecting a line along basically the crest, or right buccal to the crest of the ridge. You could have a second line right buccal to the crest of the ridge. And lingually, draw what will be your external finish line down to maybe at least 3 millimeters, so that then you'll have a 4 millimeter lingual bar that will go along. Overall, we were 7 millimeters down. for your lattice down to touch the external finish line, and then that will connect to the major connector in a moment. On the other side, it's a tube tooth, so we draw a dot on the tip of the ridge crest. We connect the outside minor connector to the guide plate of the premolar and the guide plate molar. And then about 3 millimeters down, we start to fill in our major connector so that there's a little step. You can see from here up to there, there's a little step that's there. And now finally, we connect all the parts by drawing in our major connector. So superiorly, it should be 3 millimeters down from the free gingival margin. We get our millimeter ruler out again, and we get an idea of what is 3 millimeters down from the free gingival margin. And then we draw in for 4 millimeters our lingual bar major connector, and all the way under the retainer going back to my molar on my left side. So in tooth-borne situations, your major connector begins at the mesiolingual of your posterior abutment tooth and comes all the way around to the mesiolingual of your posterior abutment tooth on the other side. That's different than if you have a distal extension case. On the distal extension cases, your major connector ends at the distal line angle of your anterior abutment on either side. So it ends at the distal lingual line angle of your anterior abutment, because there are no posterior teeth in this Kennedy Class 1 situation. So your major connector ends there. Do not draw your major connector all the way along, coming backwards underneath the physical retainer. Always, for these tooth and tissue-borne cases, end your major connector at the distal line angle of the anterior abutment tooth. So as I say, the second part of the exam after you've done the dentograph is drawing in blue your design, which matches what you had drawn on your dentograph onto your cast that has been surveyed, has heights of contour around any tooth that touches metal, has your dots marked for 010 undercuts right where the arrows on the dentograph point, and then has all of the same parts that you've drawn in as you identified on your dentograph. And any area that's going to have to be reshaped or recontoured in your patient's mouth is marked in red. That way, you know, a month from now when your patient comes into your office again, and it's like you've seen a lot of patients between when you first saw this patient and now, you don't necessarily remember where you're going to have to reshape or recontour. That's why to that appointment you bring your diagnostic cast that's drawn in red and blue like this, because a quick glance at this and it's like, oh yeah, I remember what I was going to do, and then you go in your mouth and you reshape and recontour. So you'll be using these diagnostic casts just like this in your practices for those of you that are going to do general dentistry or maybe prosthodontics. Are there any questions about what we expect to see on these casts? If not, work with your faculty then to get the frameworks drawn on your surveyed casts. The other the other four casts, we still don't want any marks on those. Those casts are going to become your patient, and when we start to reshape and recontour, I don't want any marks on those casts because your patients don't come pre-surveyed to your chair, all right? You have to figure out ways to reshape that mouth that is going to meet your design. So don't put any marks on your second set of casts. In a couple of weeks, probably 4 weeks, we'll be reshaping and recontouring them. Okay, thank you, everyone.